We saw the Twitter feeds as I was coming off air last night of Conservative MPs saying Dominic Cummings has given a full and frank account, it's time to move on. And the government would like to move on. Firstly, because this is causing them huge embarrassment and tying them in knots. And secondly, because they've actually got some quite important things to talk about. Next week, the track and trace scheme begins, albeit slowly, but it begins next week. Car showrooms will be open. Outdoor markets will be open from the 15th of June. We're going to get furniture shops, toy shops, shoe shops, electricians' shops, tailors, photography studios, indoor markets, malls. From the 15th of June, most shops in this country will be open again, albeit there'll be social distancing and some degree of enforcement. So there are some very important things to talk about, particularly in terms of getting the economy moving. And for those that work in the private sector, particularly for those that are self-employed, acting as sole traders, running their own limited companies, many of them are desperate, and I mean desperate, for things to get moving again, particularly as the infection rate in most parts of the country is now pretty low. The question with the Cummings saga is it possible for them to move on and talk about these important things, or has Dominic Cummings become a barrier to that happening? Well, today at 5 o'clock, as ever, we have a Downing Street press conference. Health Secretary Matt Hancock in the chair, watching it all and asking a question, indeed, was Ben Kentish. Ben, earlier on today, there was a ministerial resignation. Could you just explain that, please, to LBC listeners?
There was, Nigel, any hopes that Number 10 had, and they did have strong hopes that this would happen, of the story fading today, of it going away finally after days of damaging headlines for them. Shattered really this morning when Douglas Ross, a Scotland office minister, resigned, saying he couldn't in all conscience support the government when it's taken the position it has in relation to Dominic Cummings. He said that he couldn't explain to his constituents, who many of whom had expressed anger, that the Dominic Cummings was staying in his post despite being seen, and there's of course an ongoing debate about whether he did, despite being seen to have broken the lockdown rules that many of those same constituents had followed. He was in a pretty damning paragraph, pretty moving paragraph. He said he's had constituents who didn't get to say goodbye to loved ones, families who could not mourn together, and people who didn't visit sick relatives because they followed the guidance. And therefore, he said he could not in good faith tell them they were wrong, and one senior government advisor was right, not how Downing Street would have wanted to start this working week.
No, and 33 Tory MPs so far have basically called on Cummings to go. 9 former ministers, including the one Douglas Ross you've just talked about, 2 select committee chairs, a variety of grandees, and some of the MPs in the new red wall seats. And Ben, also, what will alarm the government? I felt, in a way, that on the human side of things, Dominic Cummings had done quite a good job yesterday, but the demand or the public opinion polls on whether he should resign up from 52% when the story broke to 59% today. But even more alarming for the government, Ben, Boris Johnson's personal approve rating, this is with Savanta Comres, is down at -1%. It was plus 19 4 days ago, and even worse, overall approval for the government in its entirety, now -2, down 16 points in one day. And on the back of that, just explain to LBC listeners what your question was to Matt Hancock.
Nigel, you're absolutely right. That will cause great concern in the Conservative Party. But my question really was about the fact that it should cause concern for us all, because as we moved into this next phase of the response to this epidemic, then faith in the government, people trusting that they are doing the right thing and following the advice they are given, whether that is social distancing, whether it is going back to work, whether it is the things we need to do, going to shops to restart the economy, and of course following the rules that will come with the new track and trace system being introduced next week. If people lose faith in the government, as you just said, that poll suggests they have to a large degree, then there's a risk that they simply stop doing what they're told and they stop following the guidance, and we have chaos, and that's a very real risk. And I asked Matt Hancock if he was worried about that and what he would say to suggestions that the government had effectively shown it was willing to take that risk, that potential risk to public health and to economic health, for the sake of saving the job of one Downing Street advisor. He talked about...
I tell you what, Ben, I've got his response here. Let's just listen to it.
I'm not underplaying the importance of the debate that there's been, and as I've said, entirely reasonable that reasonable people can disagree with over what happened over the description of what happened over the weekend.
Not very clear, is it?
It wasn't, Nigel, and the government will desperately hope that people do continue to follow the rules. The problem is their authority in telling people to do so is undeniably dented by the whole saga over the weekend. What they'll hope, and I think what many of us might hope, is that people will use their own common sense to make the decisions about the risks to them and their families, and will follow the scientists, even if they've lost faith in the ministers. But the other interesting finding in the polls that were out today was that 71% of people think that Dominic Cummings did break the lockdown. And my point was really, it feels a bit irrelevant now whether Boris Johnson or Matt Hancock or indeed any of us as individuals think he did or didn't. When the public has decided that he did, it becomes much harder to say to people, you must follow these rules, when they can turn around, and as police officers have been telling LBC is already happening, and say, well, hold on, he didn't, so why should I? And that is the comms battle the government now has.
What chance have the police got in Hyde Park or anywhere else of telling people to social distance right now? I know, I get it. Ben, in your professional opinion, over the course of the next few days, will the government be able to move on and to start to talk about the really important things like the economy?
I think if things continue on their current course, Nigel, then yes, the story's just starting to subside. There's two things that could change that. Either a real quickening of the number of resignations of Tory MPs and particularly ministers. No sign of that yet. It's been a steady trickle so far. The other thing is, of course, any new information about what Dominic Cummings did or didn't do, any fresh allegations. But if neither of those things happen, I think the story will start to subside and Dominic Cummings will stay in post. The real question, though, as I say, is what damage has it done to the government, to the policy, and to Boris Johnson himself?
Absolutely, Ben, thank you. And Ben saying, it's beginning to subside unless we get more resignations. I said last night at 7 o'clock, I was 50-50 on whether Cummings would survive. It really depends on public opinion. So far, public opinion appears to have worsened since the press conference. Arguably, if he hadn't done it, it might have worsened even more. I don't know. I just don't know. But, can they move on and start to talk about the economy? The problem is they're digging themselves in so deep that in their support of Cummings, they're beginning